MTL Cross, and I'm your host for the JCAL Education at Home series, Hip Hop History. Me, I'm a music producer, singer-songwriter, musician, educator, and obviously a historian. Although I started out, of course, making songs, history has always been just as much as a love for me. And after studying for over 10 years with established historians, I'd begun to do my own thing while making my own impact on the historian community. And I'm grateful for that. Now, every now and then in hip-hop history, a song is born that changes the way people rap, sometimes DJ, sometimes even the way they dance. This is one of those songs. I want you to just sit here and watch all the moving parts that had to come together to make this a reality. Insane. Watch this. We have a lot to cover. Picture this. A baby boy is born. Let's call him E, and he lives in East Elmhurst, Queens. Picture it. A couple of blocks over in this same neighborhood, El Hajj Malik El Shabazz hops a plane to London, gives his famous Oxford debate. The very next year, Malcolm brings a friend of his to the hood, the same hood E lived. At this point, he's the champ. 5 years later, a kid was born out in Long Island by the name William Michael Griffin Jr. But the family called him Pop. So let's call him Pop for now. Mr. and Mrs. Griffin had a genius on their hands. Now, the previous year, a blues man created a song called Tramp. And if you into hip hop, you already know those who sampled this. Are you with me? The first artist credited as a soul singer remade this same song, Tramp. We talking about Otis Redding. And the queen, Carla Thomas. This song even became a hit overseas. London, you know, the place 5 years earlier Malcolm delivered his Oxford speech. Now, let's stay in Britain for a second. In this part of the globe, some session musicians had been killing the game. One day they were in the studio and decided to do a rendition of Tramp. They titled the song using some words we would use to describe the late Malcolm X's friend, the champ. Now let's skip 5 more years. Now, a man by the name of Clive Campbell threw a back to school party in the Bronx. Well, of course we know him today as Kool Herc, you already know. But one of the records that Kool Herc became known to play was the Jackson 5's Hum Along and Dance.
Get on up! Let's get down.
Hard. Speaking of the Jackson 5, just a few years earlier, the Jackson 5 had remade a beautiful song called People Make the World Go Round, composed by one of history's most underrated geniuses, Tom Bell. He had a nephew in New York. Now, his nephew's name was Leroy Burgess. Leroy was in a group called Black Ivory, and they were doing their thing at this point. Now, bear in mind, Black Ivory, led by Leroy Burgess, had a manager by the name of Patrick Adams. Remember these gentlemen. Okay. Now, meanwhile, back in Queens, a soul singer by the name of Roy C. discovered this young high school band in Jamaica High School. We talking Southside. This band was called the Honey Drippers. Now, Roy C. wrote a song for the Honey Drippers and called the song Impeach the President. You've heard it before.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have the Honey Drippers in the house tonight.
Now, what happens to Richard Nixon?
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Now, surprisingly, earlier on, he found an ally, a guy who lived not far from the Honey Drippers in Queens, a guy that we call
the hardest working man in show business,
a man that we call
Mr. Dynamite,
a man that we call the Godfather of Soul, James Brown. James Brown distanced himself from Nixon. In came Gerald Ford. What was James Brown's song called?
Funky down.
Some of y'all already know where I'm going with this. During this era, James Brown had a background singer and dancer from the same borough as Kool Herc. Her name was Lola Blank, but they called her Lola Love. She could be seen performing with James Brown on some of the biggest stages. Let's move ahead. By now, E was making a name for himself. As a DJ, he had been playing Funky President, The Champ by the Mohawks, Impeach the President, all that. He's blossoming. This same year, Pop from Long Island goes to high school. Pop meets a teacher by the name of Miss Bonaparte, who heard that Pop had been rapping. So she began to introduce him to exercises that allowed Pop to really begin cultivating what became his lyrical brilliance. Now, while E is DJing and Pop is becoming a lyricist, remember when I said to remember Leroy Burgess from the group Black Ivory? Well, Black Ivory was not together anymore, but Leroy Burgess, along with manager Patrick Adams, were collaborating and creating hit records for other people. Now watch this. Remember when I said James Brown had an amazing backup singer and dancer, Lola Love? Well, her married name was Lola Blank. Okay, Lola's husband was a man by the name of Bob Blank. Bob Blank was an engineer and musician, owned a studio called Blank Tape Studios. Okay, one day, who walks in? Patrick Adams and Leroy Burgess. With them, they bring a musician by the name of James Calloway and Sonny Davenport. Ultimately, Leroy Burgess, formerly of Black Ivory, says, I have a song that uses a slang term that we've been saying, and it might be a hit. So Leroy Burgess, James Calloway, Sonny Davenport get on their instruments. Bob Blank gets on his guitar, and they create the demo for a song, Over Like a Fat Rat. Lola Love sings the song. Notice how Lola Blank, aka Lola Love, connects the dot between this camp and the James Brown camp. Amazing. Now, a girl from upstate New York, Fonda Ray. Bob Blank hears Fonda Ray and suggests, how about we record her singing Over Like a Fat Rat? They agree. She does it. The rest is history. Whenever E from Queens got on the set, one of the songs he was going to play to light up the party, like any dance floor, he would play this.
Over like a fat rat.
Now let me stop to say this. Pop had a big brother, started calling himself Hakim, his big brother. Now Pop had been introduced into the Nation of Gods and Earths, which interestingly grew out of the same organization that Malcolm X had been a part of, the Nation of Islam. Now Pop sees this name, Hakim, loves it, takes the H off, adds an R, and Pop was no longer Pop. Pop now became
Rockin' my law, and R.A. stand for Raw, switch it around. It still comes out R.
A mutual friend brings E to Rakim's house. E was the type of friend that would hit you with that street stare. Could be intimidating, but as brilliant as Rakim was as a lyricist, E was becoming, not only as a DJ, but the business mind. They were equally as unique. By the way, let's just call E.
Eric B.
Eric B says to Rakim, I know
Marley Marl,
I know
Mr. Magic,
I know
Fly Top.
How about we make a record at Marley Marl's house in Queensbridge? They got with Marley Marl. The notorious story is that Marley didn't quite get Rakim at the time. You see, Rakim, in wanting his lyrics to be thought-provoking, felt that if he pulled it back, instead of jumping out at you, he's gonna draw you into him, thus listening to the lyrical content in consciousness. Who walks in the house? None other than
My MC name is Sham.
Shan began recording Rakim. They finished the record, go back to Long Island. Eric B decides he wants to mix a James Brown song and a Fonda Ray song to make one song. They go back to Marley's house on what would be a fateful day, a day that they recorded a song that changed the face of hip-hop. Well, after some doing, they end up back at Marley's house. Marley takes the snare from a song he had done around that time. But hold up, that's not just the snare from the bridge. It is the snare from the song featuring those kids from Jamaica High School. Impeach the president, that's one. But as Eric envisioned, Marley creates the drum pattern of Funky President, that's two. In a very revolutionary thought in putting the bass line of Over Like a Fat Rat, Over Like a Fat Rat. That's three. It was one more thing Eric B wanted to cut into the song. But for that, we gotta go back to East Elmhurst. We gotta go back to El Hajj, Malik Al-Shabazz, bringing his boy Cassius Clay. We gotta go back to the champ. Now, interesting story. Years ago, Fidel Castro comes to New York. Most hotels would not put him up. They did in Harlem at the Teresa Hotel. Guess who he meets with? The dude who was living in East Elmhurst, Eric B's neighborhood, Malcolm X. Now, by this time, years later, in '86, the Teresa Hotel was no longer functioning. But inside that hotel was a record company, Zakia Records. Now, every dance floor, every truck, every car, every system was playing this.
I came in the door, I said it before, I never let the mic magnetize me no more.
At that point, Eric B and Rakim was born. Eric B and Rakim impacted lyricists, business, fashion, gold chain wearing, consciousness. All of these records are needed in order to create this one hip-hop game changer. And by the way, remember when I said Patrick Adams brought Leroy Burgess and the fellas into the studio and they ultimately did Fat Rat? Well, guess who became Eric B and Rakim's studio engineer, helping to sonically make the Paid in Full album one of the top game-changing albums in hip-hop history? Patrick Adams. Full circle. Mind-blowing. Thank you for checking us out here at JCAL's Education at Home series, Hip Hop History. In the next episode I'll show you, I will be discussing one of hip hop's most unique stories. A song that both celebrates life and mourns death while creating art that revolutionized culture forever. See you next time.